The stars looked different that night, and Captain Daniel Harper knew something was wrong. He stood on the bridge of the Victory's Hope, watching the sensor screens flash with readings that made no sense. His ship had been exploring the outer edges of human territory for 3 months, and everything had been routine until now. The communications array went silent first, and then every colony in human space stopped responding within the same hour. Dr. Olivia Grant rushed onto the bridge with her tablet showing impossible data. The space around 12 different star systems was bending in ways that physics said could not happen. She showed Daniel the readings, and he felt his stomach drop, because he had seen enough strange things in space to know when something truly dangerous was approaching. The crew gathered around the main screen as massive shapes began appearing in the darkness between stars. The alien vessels were like nothing humanity had ever imagined. They looked like giant crystals that caught and twisted light in painful ways. Each ship was easily 10 times larger than the biggest human battleship, and they moved with a grace that seemed wrong for something so huge. Daniel ordered his crew to stay quiet and keep all weapons powered down because he did not want to provoke whatever these things were. Back on New Haven Colony, Peter Blake was trying to reach anyone who could tell him what was happening. He had been the colony administrator for 5 years, and had handled every crisis from meteor strikes to equipment failures, but this silence from Earth terrified him more than anything else. His communications officer kept trying different frequencies and protocols while 3 million colonists went about their day not knowing that something terrible was coming. Peter decided to send a message to the alien ships using every format and language that humanity had ever developed. He included mathematical formulas and musical notes and images of Earth and its people. The response came within seconds, and it was not what he had hoped for. A beam of pure energy struck the main dome of New Haven and ripped away the atmosphere in less than a minute. Peter watched through the window as people in the streets below suddenly found themselves exposed to vacuum, and he could do nothing but scream as millions died in front of his eyes. Commander Lisa Martinez was stationed at Aurora Station orbiting Earth when the alien fleet arrived. She had 30 years of military experience and had trained for every possible scenario, but watching dozens of those crystalline ships approach humanity's homeworld made her realize that all her training meant nothing. She gave the order to fire every weapon the O station had and watched as missiles and energy beams bounced off the alien hulls like raindrops on glass. The aliens returned, fire with weapons that cut through human shields like they were not even there. Lisa saw 3 orbital platforms explode in brilliant flashes of light and knew that thousands of her fellow soldiers had just died. She ordered all remaining stations to focus their fire on a single alien ship, and for a brief moment it seemed to work as cracks appeared in the crystalline surface. Then the ship repaired itself in seconds, and Lisa knew that humanity was facing something far beyond their ability to fight. General Vincent Hayes coordinated the defense from deep inside a bunker on Earth, but he could see that defense was becoming impossible. Reports came in from every colony showing the same pattern of attack and the same devastating results. He made the hardest decision of his life and ordered a full evacuation of the outer colonies. Every ship that could fly was to be loaded with as many people as possible and sent toward the inner systems where maybe they could build up enough forces to make a real stand. Lieutenant Jake Morrison volunteered to lead the rearguard action above New Terra because someone had to buy time for the evacuation transports. He took his squadron of 12 fighters against an alien force that numbered in the hundreds. The battle was brief and brutal as his pilots flew their ships with desperate courage against an enemy that seemed unstoppable. Jake watched as his friends died one by one, but they held the line long enough for 3 million refugees to escape. His last transmission before his ship exploded was a simple message telling the transports to fly fast and never look back. Dr. Amanda Brooks worked in the Mars Research Institute studying fragments of alien technology that had been recovered from the battle sites. She was a quantum physicist who specialized in exotic materials, and what she found in the alien wreckage disturbed her deeply. The crystalline structure was not just armor or hull plating, but seemed to be alive in some way. It resonated with frequencies that matched the quantum signatures of living consciousness itself. Amanda ran test after test and slowly began to understand what the aliens were doing. They were not just destroying colonies or killing people. They were harvesting something fundamental from the worlds they attacked. Each planet where consciousness had evolved carried a unique quantum pattern, and the aliens were consuming that pattern like food. They left behind dead worlds that could never support thinking life. Again, she presented her findings to the Emergency Defense Council and watched as military officers and civilian leaders struggled to understand what she was telling them. The aliens were not conquerors who wanted territory or resources. They were something far worse. They were predators who fed on the very essence that made worlds capable of supporting sentient beings, and they had been doing this for a very long time. Captain Daniel Harper received orders to investigate an ancient facility that human scouts had found on a dead world in the frontier territories. The planet had once supported life, but now it was just a barren rock with strange ruins that were millions of years old. Daniel led a team down to the surface, and they found something that changed everything. The ruins contained data banks that still functioned after all this time, and the information they held was both terrifying and hopeful. 17 different civilizations had faced these same aliens across millions of years, and all of them had been destroyed. The data showed world after world being harvested and left dead. But one species called the Catharn had managed to fight back before they died. They had discovered a weakness in the crystalline structure of the alien ships and had built weapons that could exploit that weakness. The blueprints were still there, waiting to be found by whoever came next. Daniel transmitted everything back to Earth and felt a small spark of hope for the first time since the invasion began. Humanity had lost 28 colonies and billions of people, but now they had something they did not have before. They had knowledge, and they had a way to fight back. The war was far from over, but at least now it was a war they might have a chance of winning. 6 months had passed since the first alien ships appeared, and humanity was losing badly. 28 colonies were gone, and billions of people were dead or missing. The alien fleet that everyone now called the Vexthor Collective continued their systematic destruction of human worlds. Every attempt to fight them in open space ended in disaster, but Dr. Amanda Brooks had spent every waking hour studying the Catharn data, and she finally had something that might work. She stood before the Emergency Defense Council with engineer Carl Jensen and physicist Dr. Helen Rodriguez presenting their breakthrough. The Catharn had built something called a resonance disruptor that could destabilize the crystalline structure of Vexthor vessels. The weapon worked by matching the quantum frequency of the alien materials and then shifting that frequency violently enough to cause catastrophic failure. The problem was that the original Catharn weapon required the power output of an entire star to function. Carl had spent 3 months working on a way to scale down the technology into something that could be mounted on a human warship. He showed the council his designs for a prototype that would need massive amounts of power, but could theoretically be run off a modified fusion reactor. Helen had done the calculations and believed they could build 3 working disruptors within 2 months if they dedicated all available resources to the project. General Vincent Hayes looked at the plans and made an immediate decision. Every shipyard and factory still under human control would focus on building these weapons. Every scientist and engineer who could contribute would be pulled from their current projects. Humanity was betting everything on this one chance to turn the tide of the war. Captain Daniel Harper took command of a small fleet tasked with testing the prototype disruptor. His ship, the Victory's Hope, had been refitted with the weapon, and Carl Jensen himself had come aboard to oversee its operation. They chose their target, carefully picking a Vexthor harvesting operation on the colony world of Horizon's Edge. Intelligence reports showed 3 harvester ships, protected by a dozen smaller escort vessels. It was a significant force, but not so large that the test would be suicide. Commander Lisa Martinez commanded the fighter squadron that would provide cover for the Victory's Hope during the attack. She had handpicked 20 pilots who understood that this mission was about more than just destroying enemy ships. If the disruptor worked, then humanity had a real weapon. If it failed, then they would likely all die and the war would continue its slow march toward human extinction. The fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Horizon's Edge system and immediately detected the Vexthor vessels. The harvesters were in low orbit, draining the quantum essence from the planet below, while their escorts patrolled in a defensive sphere. Daniel ordered his fleet to approach at maximum combat speed, giving the Vexthor no time to fully react before the battle began. Lisa launched her fighters, and they screamed toward the enemy formation, drawing fire away from the capital ships. The Vexthor escorts responded exactly as expected, turning to engage the fighters with their beam weapons. 3 human fighters exploded in the first seconds of combat, but the sacrifice bought time for Daniel to position the Victory's Hope for a clear shot at the nearest harvester. Carl activated the resonance disruptor, and everyone on the bridge held their breath as the weapon powered up. The energy drain was massive, pulling so much power that life support systems dimmed and artificial gravity fluctuated. Then the weapon fired, sending an invisible wave of quantum disruption through space toward its target. For 3 agonizing seconds, nothing seemed to happen, and Daniel thought they had failed. Then the Vexthor harvester began to shake. Small cracks appeared in its crystalline surface and spread rapidly like lightning across glass. The cracks widened and bright light poured out from inside the vessel. The other Vexthor ships stopped what they were doing and turned toward the dying harvester, as if they could not believe what they were seeing. The harvester exploded in a brilliant cascade of crystal fragments, and the shockwave disabled 2 escort ships nearby. Lisa pressed her attack, ordering her fighters to focus on the damaged escorts while Daniel recharged the disruptor for another shot. The second shot took 4 minutes to charge, during which time the Vexthor began to retreat. They were afraid, and that was something no human had seen before. The second disruptor blast destroyed another harvester, and the remaining Vexthor vessels fled into hyperspace, abandoning the system entirely. The bridge of the Victory's Hope erupted in cheers as crew members celebrated humanity's first real victory against the Vexthor. Carl and Helen embraced, knowing that their weapon worked better than they had dared hope. Daniel sent word back to Earth that the disruptor was effective and recommended immediate mass production. General Vincent Hayes received the news and allowed himself a small smile before issuing orders to accelerate the weapons. Program Lieutenant Sophie Turner was a communications specialist who had been analyzing Vexthor transmissions for months with little success. During the battle at Horizon's Edge, she had captured several broadcasts between the alien ships, and something in the data made her pause. She ran the signals through her decryption algorithms and discovered patterns that suggested the Vexthor were not as unified as everyone thought. The transmissions showed disagreement and conflict between different groups within the fleet. Sophie brought her findings to Daniel, who immediately understood the implications. If the Vexthor collective was not actually a collective but rather several factions working together, then humanity might be able to exploit those divisions. He ordered Sophie to continue her analysis and to identify as many different factions as possible. She discovered 3 distinct groups, each with different communication protocols and different tactical preferences. Admiral Karen Phillips took command of Operation Starfall, a coordinated strike against Vexthor positions across 12 star systems. The plan was to hit them everywhere at once, using the new resonance disruptors to destroy their harvesting operations before they could respond. Every available warship was equipped with at least 1 disruptor, and Admiral Phillips had assembled the largest human fleet. Since the war began, the operation launched on schedule and caught the Vexthor completely unprepared. Human fleets struck at targets from the inner colonies to the frontier worlds, and everywhere the disruptors proved devastatingly effective. The Vexthor lost dozens of harvesters and hundreds of escort ships in a single day. For the first time since the invasion began, humanity was pushing the aliens back instead of retreating. Dr. Olivia Grant studied the tactical data from Operation Starfall and noticed something important. The Vexthor were not just retreating, they were reorganizing. Their fleet movements suggested they were preparing for something bigger. She warned General Hayes that the enemy would likely launch a major counterattack once they adapted to the human weapons. The question was whether humanity could build up their forces fast enough to survive what was coming. Humanity celebrated their victories, but Security Director Nathan Cole could not shake the feeling that something was wrong. Reports from various military installations showed equipment failures and communication breakdowns that seemed too coordinated to be coincidence. He began a quiet investigation using only his most trusted agents, because if his suspicions were correct, then humanity had a problem that went beyond the alien threat. Agent Claire Bennett was one of Nathan's best operatives, and he assigned her to infiltrate a group of civilians who had been flagged for suspicious behavior. The group called themselves the Ascension, and they believed that cooperation with the Vexthor was humanity's only path to survival. Claire spent weeks gaining their trust and slowly working her way into their inner circle. What she discovered horrified her, because the Ascension was not just a group of frightened civilians but a well-organized network that had been sabotaging human defenses since the war began. The leader of the Ascension was a man named Gregory Walsh, who had once been the governor of a frontier colony. The Vexthor had spared his world in exchange for his cooperation, and he had been feeding them intelligence about human military operations ever since. Gregory believed that the Vexthor would eventually win the war, and that helping them was the only way to ensure some humans would survive. He had recruited hundreds of followers, who shared his beliefs, and together they had caused more damage than anyone realized. Claire gathered evidence of sabotage attacks on 3 orbital defense platforms and 2 major shipyards. She documented meetings between Ascension members and Vexthor intermediaries who were apparently capable of communicating with humans. The aliens had promised Gregory and his followers that they would be incorporated into the collective in a way that preserved their consciousness and individuality. It was a lie, but Gregory wanted to believe it so badly that he had betrayed his entire species. Agent Bennett prepared to transmit her findings to Nathan Cole, but the Ascension discovered her true identity before she could send the data. Gregory ordered her captured alive because he wanted to know how much the authorities had learned about his organization. Claire fought hard, but there were too many of them, and they dragged her to a hidden facility deep in an asteroid belt far from any human patrol routes. Captain Daniel Harper received a coded message from Nathan Cole requesting immediate assistance with a rescue operation. Nathan had been tracking Claire's location through a subcutaneous transmitter and knew exactly where the Ascension was holding her. The problem was that the facility was heavily defended, and any official military action would take too long to organize. Daniel did not hesitate because Claire had saved his life during a previous mission, and he owed her everything. He assembled a team of volunteers, including Commander Lisa Martinez and Lieutenant Sophie Turner, who both insisted on coming along despite the personal risk. They took a fast courier ship and headed for the asteroid belt, using false transponder codes to avoid detection. The facility appeared on their sensors as a converted mining station with defensive weapons that could shred any ship that got too close. Lisa came up with a plan that was equal parts brilliant and insane. She would take a fighter and attack the station from one direction, drawing their fire, while Daniel brought the courier ship in from another angle. Sophie would hack into the station's communication systems and disable their targeting computers, giving them a brief window to dock and extract Claire. It was dangerous, but no one had a better idea. The attack went exactly as planned until it did not. Lisa's fighter drew the station's fire, and she dodged missiles and beam weapons with skill that bordered on supernatural. Sophie penetrated their security systems and shut down half their weapons, just as Daniel docked with the station. Then everything went wrong because the Ascension had been expecting a rescue attempt and had set a trap. Armed guards surrounded Daniel's team the moment they breached the airlock and forced them to surrender. Gregory Walsh appeared looking smug and satisfied as he explained that Nathan Cole's communication had been intercepted and decoded. The Ascension had known exactly when and how the rescue would happen. Gregory ordered all of them taken to holding cells where they would be used as hostages to negotiate with the human government. Claire, Bennett managed to whisper to Daniel that she had hidden her evidence in the station's computer system and that Sophie could retrieve it if they could reach a terminal. Gregory made a mistake by keeping them all in the same detention area because he wanted to gloat about his victory. He explained how the Vexthor had promised him and his followers a place in their collective and how humanity's resistance was pointless and destructive. Sophie pretended to be more injured than she actually was, and the guards paid less attention to her than they should have. She used a lockpick concealed in her boot to open her cell, and then freed the others while the guards were distracted by an argument between 2 Ascension members. The team moved quickly through the station using maintenance tunnels to avoid detection while Sophie searched for a computer terminal. They found a control room that was momentarily unoccupied, and Sophie downloaded Claire's evidence files while Daniel and Lisa stood guard. The data showed the full extent of the Ascension's betrayal, including names, dates, and details of every sabotage operation they had conducted. It also contained recordings of conversations between Gregory and the Vexthor that proved the aliens were lying about preserving human consciousness. The team fought their way back to their ship with half the station's security force chasing them. Lisa held the corridor while Daniel and Sophie carried Claire, who had been badly beaten during her interrogation. They reached the docking port and sealed the airlock behind them, just as enemy forces arrived. Daniel blasted away from the station and dodged defensive fire while Sophie transmitted Claire's evidence to Nathan, calling every major news network in human space. Gregory Walsh watched his plans collapse as the truth about the ascension spread across human civilization in minutes. Public outrage was immediate and total. Ascension cells were raided simultaneously across dozens of worlds, and hundreds of traitors were arrested. Gregory tried to escape but was captured by security forces who were less gentle than they might have been. He was brought to Earth in chains and forced to reveal everything he knew about the Vexthor, including their greatest weakness. Dr. Amanda Brooks listened to Gregory's interrogation recordings and realized something crucial. The Vexthor were not individuals, but rather extensions of a central consciousness that coordinated all their actions. Gregory had learned about a massive mothership hidden in a region called the Void Reaches that served as the hub for the entire collective. If that ship could be destroyed, then the Vexthor would lose their coordination and become vulnerable to defeat. General Vincent Hayes called an emergency meeting with his top advisors to discuss this new intelligence, and everyone understood that they were looking at humanity's best chance to end the war. The construction of the Endurance began in Earth's largest orbital shipyard, and it was unlike anything humanity had ever built before. Engineer Carl Jensen and Dr. Helen Rodriguez designed a vessel that was part warship and part massive weapons platform, built around a resonance disruptor powerful enough to destroy the Vexthor mothership. The problem was that the weapon required the ship to get within point-blank range, which meant the crew would almost certainly not survive the mission. Captain Daniel Harper volunteered to command the Endurance without hesitation because he understood that someone had to make the sacrifice, and he had already lost too many friends to let anyone else take his place. Commander Lisa Martinez insisted on joining him as tactical officer, and Lieutenant Sophie Turner signed on as communications specialist. Dr. Olivia Grant came aboard as science officer because she wanted to see the mission through to the end. Within a week, Daniel had a full crew of 300 volunteers who all understood they were signing up for a one-way trip. The Endurance took shape over 6 months as workers labored around the clock to complete construction. The ship was massive but sleek, designed for speed and maneuverability rather than heavy armor. Carl installed the latest version of the resonance disruptor along with backup systems and redundancies, because the weapon absolutely had to work when the moment came. Helen designed the power systems to channel the output of 4 fusion reactors into a single devastating pulse. While the Endurance was being built, the Vexthor launched renewed attacks across human space as if sensing that something important was happening. General Vincent Hayes and Admiral Karen Phillips coordinated desperate defensive actions with a fleet that was stretched dangerously thin. Every ship and every soldier was needed to hold the line while the Endurance prepared for its mission. Thousands died buying time for the weapon that might end the war. Dr. Amanda Brooks continued studying Vexthor technology and made a disturbing discovery about the nature of their mothership. The vessel was not just a coordination hub, but the physical manifestation of the collective itself. Every consciousness the Vexthor had ever absorbed was stored in that crystalline structure, creating a combined intelligence of billions of minds spanning millions of years. Destroying it would mean ending not just the Vexthor but all the species they had consumed. Amanda struggled with the moral implications of what they were planning to do. The Vexthor had destroyed countless civilizations, but those civilizations still existed in some form within the collective. Killing the mothership meant condemning billions of innocent minds to oblivion, along with their oppressors. She brought her concerns to Daniel, who understood her dilemma but did not see any alternative because humanity was fighting for survival and could not afford mercy. The day finally came when the Endurance was ready to launch and the crew gathered for a final briefing. Daniel stood before them and spoke honestly about what they were facing. The journey to the Void Reaches would take 3 months through some of the most dangerous space in the galaxy. The Vexthor would know they were coming and would do everything possible to stop them. The chances of success were slim and the chances of survival were practically zero. Every person on that ship could still back out and no one would think less of them. Not a single crew member left. They had all made their choice and they would see it through together. The Endurance departed Earth orbit to the cheers of millions who gathered to watch. News broadcasts showed the ship accelerating away from humanity's homeworld, and commentators spoke hopefully about the mission's chances. But everyone who truly understood the situation knew they were watching 300 heroes fly off to die. The journey through hyperspace was tense and quiet as the crew prepared for what was coming. Lisa trained her tactical teams, running endless combat simulations and preparing for every possible scenario. Sophie monitored Vexthor communications and tracked enemy fleet movements to help plan their approach. Olivia studied every scrap of data about the mothership, trying to find some weakness they could exploit. 2 months into the journey, the Endurance encountered its first serious opposition when a Vexthor hunter group detected them and attacked. Lisa launched fighters to intercept, while Daniel maneuvered the massive ship with surprising agility. The battle lasted 4 hours and cost them 12 fighters and 30 crew members, but they destroyed the enemy force and continued toward their destination. The Vexthor now knew exactly where they were going and what they intended to do. Dr. Olivia Grant was working in her lab when she made a breakthrough that changed everything. She had been analyzing the quantum signatures of the Vexthor mothership and discovered something unexpected in the data. The collective was not as unified as it appeared, because there were competing factions within the central consciousness that disagreed about fundamental questions. Some wanted to continue harvesting species, while others questioned whether their actions were justified. The internal conflict was subtle, but it was there. She brought her findings to Daniel and suggested that maybe there was another way to stop the Vexthor without destroying them completely. If they could somehow amplify the internal divisions within the collective, they might be able to fracture it into smaller pieces that were no longer capable of coordinated action. Daniel was skeptical but told Olivia to keep working on the idea, because any option that did not require total annihilation was worth exploring. The Endurance entered the void reaches and immediately encountered problems. The region was filled with gravitational anomalies and radiation storms that played havoc with the ship's systems. Navigation became a nightmare as they picked their way through a maze of dangers that would tear apart any normal vessel. Carl worked miracles keeping the engines running, while Helen managed the power distribution to prevent catastrophic failures. They detected the Vexthor mothership orbiting a neutron star at the center of a defensive formation that included thousands of escort vessels. The crystalline structure of the mothership was visible even at extreme range, and it was beautiful in a terrible way. The ship pulsed with light that seemed to come from within, and Daniel understood that he was, looking at the accumulated consciousness of every species the Vexthor had ever destroyed. Lisa studied the defensive formation and plotted an attack approach that would give them the best chance of reaching firing range. The plan required precise timing and perfect execution, because even a small mistake would result in the Endurance being destroyed before they could fire their weapon. She briefed her tactical teams, and everyone understood their role in the coming battle. Sophie detected something strange in the Vexthor communications around the mothership. There were dozens of other massive crystalline structures in the area that looked like destroyed or abandoned ships. Lieutenant Turner realized these were not wrecks, but rather evidence of internal conflict within the collective. Different factions had fought each other here, and some had lost. The discovery supported Olivia's theory about divisions within the Vexthor and suggested that their enemy was not as invulnerable as it seemed. Daniel called his senior officers together for one final meeting before they began their attack run and asked each of them if they had any doubts or concerns. The Endurance dropped out of hyperspace directly into the Vexthor defensive perimeter, and the battle began immediately. Thousands of alien vessels converged on the human ship from every direction, firing weapons that lit up space like a storm of lightning. Commander Lisa Martinez coordinated the defensive response as fighters launched from the hangar bays to intercept incoming attackers. The crew had trained for this moment, but nothing could truly prepare them for the overwhelming force they now faced. Captain Daniel Harper guided the Endurance through the chaos using every bit of skill and experience he had gained over his career. The ship shuddered as alien weapons struck the shields, and he could feel the power systems straining under the load. Engineer Carl Jensen worked frantically in the engine room, rerouting power and bypassing damaged systems. As fast as they failed, Dr. Helen Rodriguez monitored the resonance disruptor and reported that the weapon would be ready to fire in 8 minutes if they could survive that long. Lisa sent her fighter squadrons on suicide runs to clear paths through the enemy formations. Pilots flew their ships with desperate courage, knowing that every second they bought brought the Endurance closer to firing range. Explosions lit up the darkness as human and alien vessels destroyed each other in a dance of death. The casualties mounted quickly, but the survivors pressed on because they understood that retreat was not an option. Lieutenant Sophie Turner maintained communications with all elements of the fleet while simultaneously monitoring Vexthor transmissions. She noticed something strange in the alien communications as the battle progressed. Some Vexthor vessels were not engaging the Endurance but instead seemed to be fighting each other. The internal divisions within the collective that Dr. Olivia Grant had discovered were manifesting as actual combat between different factions. The Endurance pushed deeper into the defensive formation, taking terrible damage but refusing to stop. Hull breaches occurred on 3 decks, and emergency bulkheads sealed automatically to contain the atmosphere loss. 50 crew members died in those initial breaches, but their sacrifice meant the ship could continue. Daniel felt each death like a physical blow but forced himself to focus on the mission because grieving would come later if they survived. Dr. Olivia Grant watched the mothership growing larger on her screens, and suddenly the Vexthor collective did something completely unexpected. A communication channel opened directly to the Endurance and information flooded into the ship's computers. Daniel felt something touch his mind, and suddenly he was experiencing the full history of the Vexthor from their perspective. He saw a civilization that had evolved millions of years ago and had faced the heat death of their universe. They had discovered a way to transcend physical form by absorbing other consciousness, but convinced themselves this was preservation rather than destruction. The Vexthor truly believed they were saving species from extinction by incorporating them into their eternal collective. They saw themselves as guardians of life, not destroyers. Daniel experienced the memories of thousands of different species who had been absorbed and felt their terror and their loss. But he also felt the Vexthor's genuine conviction that they were doing the right thing. It was a perspective that made their crimes no less terrible, but infinitely more tragic. Olivia received the same information and immediately understood what was happening. The collective was trying to justify itself in its final moments. She worked quickly, modifying the resonance disruptor based on new data flowing into her systems. If they fired the weapon as originally designed, it would destroy the mothership completely, but she thought she could adjust the frequency to fragment the collective instead of annihilating it. The absorbed consciousnesses could be preserved in a dormant state while the coordinating intelligence was disrupted. She sent her modifications to Helen, who had only seconds to implement the changes before they reached firing range. Carl saw what Olivia was attempting and immediately understood the implications. They could save billions of minds that the Vexthor had taken while still stopping the threat. It was a slim chance, but better than condemning innocent species to oblivion. Helen made the adjustments and prayed that the weapon would still function. The Endurance closed to point-blank range with the mothership, and Lisa ordered all remaining fighters to concentrate their fire on the escort vessels to keep them occupied. Human pilots flew directly into enemy formations and detonated their ships in kamikaze attacks that cleared a final path. It was a sacrifice born of desperation, but it worked because the Endurance had a clear shot at its target. Daniel gave the order to fire, and Helen activated the modified resonance disruptor. The weapon drew power from every system on the ship, and the lights dimmed as massive amounts of energy channeled into a single devastating pulse. The beam was invisible to normal sight, but instruments showed it racing toward the mothership at the speed of light. For 3 eternal seconds, everyone held their breath, wondering if the modifications would work, or if they had just thrown away their only chance. The Vexthor mothership began to change. Instead of shattering into fragments, the crystalline structure started separating into millions of individual nodes. Each node contained the preserved consciousness of a different species, and they drifted apart like seeds on the wind. The coordinating intelligence that had controlled the collective fragmented into pieces too small to function, and the Vexthor suddenly lost the unified purpose that had made them so dangerous. The effect spread through the entire Vexthor fleet like a wave. Ships that had been attacking moments before went dark and drifted aimlessly. The crystalline vessels that had seemed so terrifying were now just empty hulls floating in space. The battle ended not with a final explosion, but with sudden silence as thousands of alien ships simply stopped functioning. Humanity had won, but in a way that none of them had expected. The Endurance was badly damaged and barely functional, but it had survived. Rescue ships arrived within hours carrying medical teams and engineers to help the wounded vessel and its crew. Captain Daniel Harper stood on the bridge and watched as human forces secured the area around the fragmented collective nodes. Each node represented a species that could potentially be restored someday, and humanity had become their guardians. General Vincent Hayes coordinated the aftermath from Earth as humanity slowly began to rebuild. 28 colonies remained dead and billions had been lost, but the species had survived. The Vexthor fleet scattered across the galaxy, with individual ships going dormant or simply drifting away without purpose. There were still threats out there, but humanity had proven they could face extinction and find a way to overcome it. Dr. Amanda Brooks established a research program dedicated to studying the collective nodes and searching for ways to restore the absorbed species. It would take decades or perhaps centuries, but humanity was committed to undoing the damage the Vexthor had caused. The war had taught them that survival was not enough, and that they had a responsibility to help others who had suffered. Captain Daniel Harper and his crew returned to Earth as heroes, but they felt more like survivors. They had done what needed to be done and saved humanity, but the cost had been terrible. 300 volunteers had left on the Endurance and only 197 returned. The fallen were honored and remembered, but the living had to find ways to move forward and rebuild what had been lost. Commander Lisa Martinez took command of a new fleet dedicated to protecting human space and searching for other threats that might be lurking in the darkness. Lieutenant Sophie Turner continued decoding alien communications and building a database of every species humanity encountered. Dr. Olivia Grant worked with Amanda on the restoration project, knowing that their success would define humanity's legacy in the galaxy. Years passed and humanity expanded cautiously back into the stars. They rebuilt the lost colonies and established new ones with the hard-won knowledge that they were not alone and not invulnerable. The war with the Vexthor became a defining moment in human history and a reminder of what they could accomplish when they refused to give up. The galaxy was vast and dangerous, but humanity had earned their place among the stars through courage and sacrifice and determination.